Yeah, hi. I'm Jiska, and
I'm Alex, hi.
And we like to break things.
Yes.
But yeah, we are the good guys, like we help the people after breaking things. All right. So what is ultra-wideband? Well, it's something that nobody knows about, like nobody really knows what it does, but it's a wireless technology. Yeah, well, the next thing is it's only available in the latest generation of devices, so only if you have like a very new iPhone or a new car or a new Pixel or Samsung phone, you would have it. And it's very difficult to like sniff anything with an SDR in that range. And for this reason, let's say it's hacker-proof, yeah? All right.
So now my part will be about the basics of ultra-wideband. So I will start by showing you the ultra-wideband frequencies are very different from all that we currently know. So you know Wi-Fi, there's 2.4 gigahertz, there's 5 gigahertz, and they have a quite narrow band. It's like 160 megahertz in the newest Wi-Fi specification. You also have GPS, which is even narrower, but ultra-wideband basically goes over all the frequencies. So you have ultra-wideband in the lower bands, like below 1 gigahertz, but you also have ultra-wideband channels that are up to 6.5 and 8 gigahertz. And the interesting thing is that what you can see in this slide, basically, like they all send with really strong power. All these technologies, but ultra-wideband is sending with really low power. That's why it's basically allowed on any frequency band, but it's just very low power and just above the noise floor. So what makes this difficult with the noise floor is that you want to detect the signals. And ultra-wideband has very special signals because it's 500 megahertz wide. Every signal is just like one pulse, and this pulse has basically no information besides, hey, I'm here, here's a pulse, and this pulse is very narrow and very steep. So when you have your noise that comes in, you can clearly see where the ultra-wideband pulses are having their maximum amplitude. And these maxima are very important because you can exactly measure at what time you were reaching them at your device. So you can have a very accurate timestamp. Why do you need an accurate timestamp in ultra-wideband? Because ultra-wideband is used to do ranging. So you can measure a distance from one device to another device with just the technology of ultra-wideband. And the basics here are very similar. They're basically simple. There are two mechanisms to do that. The one is single-sided two-way ranging. You have an initiator that sends a packet to the responder. That packet takes some time to be received by the responder, and that time is basically, you can calculate the distance right from it, but you don't know how long it took, so the responder also just has to answer after a predefined time, and then the initiator has like the full round-trip time. It can remove the reply delay that was added and just easily calculate this so-called propagation delay, so the time it took from one device to another. And as these signals are traveling with the speed of light, you can easily measure the distance. So if you know like how long it took from one device to another, you just take the speed of light and you know how long it took and how far it is away. And the cool thing is nothing can travel faster than speed of light, so that's also very good for security reasons. Another mechanism is double-sided two ranging. It's very similar. It basically is the same thing twice. It has two advantages. One is that both devices in the end know the distance. And the other advantage is that there is a clock drift that can happen with the devices. So when the clock is not super accurate, then you have to remove that from the whole equation and do some complicated measurements on top. But you don't need to do that with double-sided ranging because both devices are sending and receiving, and then basically the clock drift gets eliminated automatically. I won't show the formula here because it's more complicated and doesn't provide any value. Interesting to see is like how is it secured, because like old versions of ultra-wideband that have never reached the our pockets. Like now, the newest version, they all that we have in our smartphones, they all use the so-called scrambled timestamp sequence, and that is generated from a shared key between those two devices. And it's expected that this shared key has been shared over a secure mechanism, and both devices are authenticated and they trust each other. And so this scrambled timestamp sequence that is part of every ultra-wideband packet can be ensured that it belongs to the devices that are actually doing the ranging. So that's the major security part here. And now Jiska will tell you more about the applications that we have right now.
Yeah, I only said it must be hacker-proof, but I didn't tell you like what is ultra-wideband doing. And in the very first application in iOS, one couldn't really tell what it's being used for. I think what happened is there were like 20 Apple engineers in a room thinking about what could we use ultra-wideband for. They were using AirDrop, and they couldn't figure out to whom they were airdropping because they have 5 devices logged into the same account. And then they were like, okay, ultra-wideband, it can do distance, it can do like angular measurement, let's integrate it in AirDrop. And together with the iPhone 11, which is the first one with an ultra-wideband chip, this feature has been released. But it's not really something that most users need. So you're probably not even aware of that this is driven by ultra-wideband. Then a bit later, in the next iOS major release, so a year later, there was finally a public framework called Nearby Interaction, and it comes with an example app where also developers can now use angular and distance information. And then I think it was around iOS 14.4, they introduced a feature for handoff. So handoff basically means you have music playing on your phone and you can transfer it to your HomePod. And it already works with Bluetooth in all the generations, but in the newest one, you actually feel the phone vibrating as you turn towards the HomePod within near range, and it gets more intense the closer you get until it finally hands over the music. So you have a haptic feedback, and it's difficult to describe, but it's like really cool. Like you get the sense of how close you are. And I think finally a good use is the AirTag introduced in iOS 14.5. So with the AirTag, you can discover lost items. And most of the time, your item is not really lost. It's just your key fob, and you forgot that it's on your couch under a pillow or something. And then it's really useful to not just have like a rough distance or knowing it's in the same room, but really knowing it's in this direction and it's like a meter away. So here you finally have a cool use case. But the other ones are interesting as well because all of them have like a different power assumption. So for example, the HomePod is wired and has like a permanent power supply, and also the protocol is a bit different. So in all these applications, you have slightly different protocol implementations under the hood, and you can really tell all of these were made for testing yet another communication paradigm. And I think the AirTag is the most challenging because you want to do ultra-wideband, which is very power consuming with a like button cell battery, and it's really cool to see this working. And after all this testing, Apple decided, yeah, now it's mature enough to finally come up with the feature it was kind of made for, like a secure distance measurement, and they rolled it out for digital car keys. And let's see what is happening in the future, like maybe you will have credit cards or I don't know what, all with secure ranging, and it would be nice to see even more security-relevant applications, at least for us hackers. Yeah, but it was not just Apple integrating this. So a bit later, also Android followed with Nearby Share. That's like very similar to AirDrop, also like to share files. And it was first integrated in Samsung devices, but also Google devices now have this. And similar to this Nearby Interaction framework, there's also an SDK for Android to develop applications and see ranging information. It's not so mature yet. Alex will tell you later about difficulties measuring a distance with it. So you can see, I mean, even Apple, it took them 2 years, 2 major iOS releases until they said it's now mature enough to put it into cars. And I think Android will also still take just a bit of time until it's stable. But yeah, you see it's a lot of cool different applications that are also mattering to security in the end.
So now we will talk about the internals and how these devices are actually ensuring this UWB ultra-wideband somewhat secure ranging. So how are they ensuring that the STS is actually generated securely and so on? So because that's the base layer you need to have to do secure ranging. So on iOS, what they do, like if you use the nearby interaction framework, then Apple tells you both devices generate an NI discovery token and need to exchange that token between both devices. So this token is somehow securely generated. Apple doesn't tell you what it does, but it's necessary that it's exchanged between both devices so they can discover each other and start ranging. How you do it is on your side, so you have to find like a secure way if you want to have it actually secure. If you just want it to work, there's also a sample application of Apple that just makes it work, but it's not secure. So when you exchange this token, then you have in the end one initiator and one responder, and they are doing exactly this double-sided two-way ranging I was showing you before. In this token, there's an identity resolving key and some identifier data, and they use the zip hash function with the Bluetooth MAC address and the identity resolving key to generate an auth tag. This auth tag is then used to do what the token promises by its name, do the discovery. So when those two devices, they now exchange the token, but they don't know what is the ultra-wideband address of each other, so how should I be sure that I'm talking to the right device? So what they do, Apple does everything with Bluetooth Low Energy. They send Bluetooth Low Energy packets. This packet basically says, yeah, that's an ultra-wideband packet, and then it sends some flags, but it also contains this authentication tag, and this authentication tag they can generate by this discovery token. So they know, okay, this is the device I'm looking for, and Apple made it very easy. The ultra-wideband address equals the Bluetooth MAC address, so they can find each other on the different physical layer. And then there's also some config data. So how do we get the STS? It's rather simple. You have two tokens, and you take 8 bytes from one token, 8 bytes from the other token. You combine each other, and then you have a 16-byte STS, which is totally standard compliant. It's rather secure, so you can also have 32 bytes that would work, but 16 bytes is fine. So this generation of the STS seems to be secure as long as developers are sticking to sharing these tokens in a secure manner. On Android, things work a bit differently. So the devices also need to discover each other somehow, and what you get as a developer is you get the ultra-wideband address, which is very short, and you need to get this address to the other device. So Google doesn't tell you how to do it, but they suggest you might use some authenticated Bluetooth Low Energy that is maybe has some pre-shared secrets or something that you can use for encryption. But it's very open what you want to do with it, so just exchange the addresses and you can already start ranging. You don't need to exchange an STS here, but if you want, then there is something called the session key info, and this sounds very promising. So you think like, okay, I can, when I want to do the secure ranging and I have like two devices to which I want to really be sure that all my measurements are secure, I put the session key info in there, and then it should be all right. And then in Google's documentation, which is the source code, it says, okay, the session key info is used to encrypt the ranging session. Okay, sounds good. And then the next part says, yeah, but if you use a profile with a static STS, then it basically just contains a static IV and a vendor ID. And apparently, all the profiles that are available to the public are only using static STS, so you're never able to set this STS value that is actually a shared key manually So basically, this is not secure ranging. This is more like reliable ranging. And if it's not really secure, then you cannot attack it, right? So if it's insecure by design, they already think about this. Funnily enough, they implement all the features you need to set your own STS key, but it's just like in a portion of Android that is not accessible to Android developers. So they can basically not do that. But if you are a smartphone manufacturer, you can use a more deeply low-level API that basically is exactly the same, but allows you to configure more things, also the STS. Yeah, but now since we know the basics, it would be interesting to see, okay, how accurate and reliable is actually ultra-wideband when it comes to my distance measurements, because how can we be sure that if I'm far away from my car, there's not like some mismeasurement and it just opens? So we defined that a 50 centimeter accuracy range should be enough that the car doesn't randomly open. And that's, for example, when you have your phone close to your door and the car is parked outside, it shouldn't have like one false measurement going off and saying, okay, -5 meters, and boom, your car is open. Interesting is also like what happens when your phone is never, like the ideal pose to do ultra-wideband ranging is like this, like taking a picture. But what happens when you turn your phone? Like your phone is never in the perfect position. Will your car just open, even if you're far away, or will it not open? Another thing where ultra-wideband might come into play is you're in your smart home. So imagine a world where everything has ultra-wideband. You walk from one room to another. All the speakers just like follow the music, just follows you around because they know you're close by. Then they start playing. The lights go on. Thermostat goes on the right temperature. And then you sit down, start reading a book, and the light turns off because it's just unreliable because the position of your phone or something was wrong. So that's what we wanted to find out, and that's why we started building this machine. It's called Gwen, and our Gwen basically holds a device and rotates it in 2 axes. And we have a very short video here that demonstrates that. So at first, for all the measurements, we have an iPhone here, and there's an AirTag on the other side, and the arm will be homed, so it's really level. And then the measurements start, and basically it does like 10 to 15 measurements on every position, and we just see like how accurate are they, because we measured the actual distance before. And we always ensure that the ultra-wideband antenna is in the center of this rotation. And we did all these measurements in like 3 environments. We did them outside to have like a ground truth. We did them in our lab where there's like a lot of walls and like screens and tables and everything. And then the parking garage of TU Darmstadt where there are like cars, because we thought like, okay, it's used in cars, should be accurate in the parking garage. And here's some results of that. So outside, it's very interesting to see that we have measured with a Google Pixel, with a Samsung, and with an iPhone. But they all have a very similar behavior. When your phone is like this and pointing directly to the device that you're measuring to, it's all very accurate. But as soon as it turns away and turns basically in the other direction, there's no signal coming through. It's not possible to measure a distance in like 5 meters to the other device. If you're really close, it still works, but at 5 meters, it starts to break. If you go at 10 meters, it's even stronger. So you can see that's basically like a full rotation of all the devices. And on the left side, they point away, and then the signals start breaking. You can verify that by looking at when you are inside somewhere, then you have a lot of walls. And all the walls reflect the signal, and basically these reflections lead to a longer path that the signal has to travel. So you can see when the phone is directing away from the device you're looking at, the distance will increase. Or we can see the distance doesn't increase largely. These are all mean measurements, so there are over 10 measurements. But on average, there's like maybe 50 centimeters, but only when it points away. Looking in the garage is basically like a mix of an outdoor environment and a lab environment, because in the garage you have like long spaces where there's no parked cars, nothing, no walls, and in these directions also the signal starts failing, but then you have also distance enlargements when there's like taking a different path. But also you can see there's like a lot of fluctuation in the garage because the cars basically are good reflection areas. Overall, though, the results are quite promising because we can see, like on the left side, it's all this average errors that we have measured, and they never go over 50 centimeters. We have like huge outliers where actually the device was pointing somewhere to the right or something like that, and it measured like 2 meters, 3 meters less. But these outliers are very short, so you have like one measurement that is really wrong, and then the next one is correct again. So if you just don't trust every measurement in the implementation, then you're good to go. We see that outside there's like a lot of positions that where you can hold your device where it stops working, but inside it basically works all the time, so it's quite reliable as long as you have enough reflections and as long as you're not too far away from the device that you're measuring to. So, but now Jiska will continue with the attacks.
Yeah, I mean, what we want to do in the end is steal a car. And actually, Ultra-Wideband has been developed to prevent this. So here's a video of a car theft, and this is for legacy technology, so something like NFC or Bluetooth-based keys. What do you think? How long will it take to steal it?
I don't know. It's like it's a modern car. It looks like a proper BMW.
Yeah. The lights turn
on. It's
on.
already open.
Okay, so first key interaction. Now we need to start the motor, right? That will take long. Yeah.
I think he's just going to the right position again.
Yeah. Engine
look where
starting.
the key is.
Yeah. Will it work? Yeah.
Maybe not. Oh, it's on.
The car is gone. The car is gone. Okay. Like, you know what is better than having like one car?
Maybe 5.
Yes. Yeah. That's good. Okay. So goodbye car. Actually, like 50% of car thefts are happening like this right now. So yeah, bye car. Can I? Yeah, okay. So now how does this legacy attack work? Basically, you have a car key. Let's say that's like next to your door at the entrance, but it's behind the door. You probably don't put it into like any isolating purse or something, just lying around there. And the attacker just waits for the signal from the car key. That was the one big antenna with the guy walking around trying to get close to the original key fob, and then receives the signal, amplifies it, retransmits it, and sends it out again. And this means like the stronger the signal is, the car would believe the key is nearby, and suddenly it opens. This has some limitations. You cannot do it over arbitrary distances because you can do a little bit of time constraints. So you can at least prevent that people are stealing cars across the globe because you can measure some time constraints. But the signal modulation of those legacy technologies, it doesn't have those small peaks from Ultra-Wideband that Alex told you about. So you couldn't really tell when like you cannot differentiate like 5 or 10 meters or something. Like this is all where you can do those relay attacks, and they work very reliable and with cheap technology. And yeah, well, this is legacy, like legacy keys, but for Ultra-Wideband it wouldn't work. Like in Ultra-Wideband, you measure really the speed of light is the limitation. You cannot travel faster than speed of light. So even when there's a signal from the key sent to the car, and if there's an attacker in between and they would forward it or amplify it, the signal strength would be higher, but the travel time, even if the software-defined radio in the center wouldn't take any processing time, even then it takes longer. So you cannot make any distance shortening from a relay attack in Ultra-Wideband. You can enlarge the distance, of course, but you cannot shorten it. You cannot travel faster. That's the basic idea. So this is how we do secure ranging in a nutshell. But yeah, so the first attack I'm going to tell you actually works nonetheless. So can we do something different? Like, can we attack the key in a way where it doesn't matter anymore? Like, we don't do a relay attack, but a different attack. And in this ghost peak attack, we exploit the fact of how the car keys are used, or like some compensations they do in practice. So yeah, ideally, you know, you have the key perfectly oriented in the air, nothing around, just outside, no obstacles, no reflections, and you have a line of sight to the car, and you have the exact distance measured. But this is not how you use a car key. The point of keyless entry is that you can leave it in your pocket. So here, for the person, it stays in their purse. They don't have to search for it a minute and then suddenly find it. They just put their pocket next to the car, it opens. And what you see here now is, like in this scenario, we have like some reflections. There's a line of sight path, but this has a low signal strength. And it might happen that this non-line of sight path, this reflection, has a higher signal strength, like in this lab environment with the reflecting walls or something. Like it can happen that this would be the distance. But now, this also means if the stronger path would be measured, then the car wouldn't open, because of course the reflection from the floor is a longer distance. The car doesn't open when you're in front of it. So we somehow need to figure out where is this, like what is the short line of sight path? What is the real first path that we take for the distance measurement? Now there's a solution for this. So basically, like ideally, you would only see one peak in the signal, no multipaths. But now we have some peaks in the received signal, and or the STS, like what we use for the distance measurement. And now we use a template and correlate this, and somewhere it matches. So this is like the main correlation peak. So now we have some channel impulse response measurement whatsoever. So you can read our paper if you want more like formulas and stuff. But the basic idea is, in this correlation, you just take the strongest peak, and this would be also the strongest signal, like this non-line of sight reflected path. But we want to find this first path, this line of sight path with this weaker signal, so that the car still opens for the user. So we have a back search window. But also, we don't want the car to open from some random noise. So we say we have some powered threshold that we take. And now the winner path in this figure would be like this one that is within the back search window and above this threshold. Like, of course, this is stuff that is now also open to the vendor. Like, how do they implement this correlation? How do they implement the back search window? What is all of their allowances? But basically, if you are able as an attacker to insert a peak somewhere, like, do I have a laser? Yes, no, maybe?
On top.
Top, yeah, here, okay. So if you, like here, somewhere here, insert like some noise into the correlation algorithm, anywhere, that is above the threshold, then this would win the first path as long as the peak is inside the window. If it's too early, you wouldn't win the race, and like if it's after, like you would increase the distance. At least if it's like higher, like I don't know. It really depends on what happens and what kind of noise you would insert into this correlation algorithm. And now the idea to modify the signal or the STS and confuse the correlation algorithm works as follows. The first packet is something that we don't attack. We just use the first packet as a trigger. And now you saw like you always have like single or double-sided ranging, so we have 2 or 3 packets, so we can now attack the following packets. And the idea is, well, there is now a message being sent back. We also craft a malicious message, and if the timing is perfect, like they're really aligned over the air, then we overshadow the signal, and with this we insert a so-called, that's the name of the attack, a ghost peak. Like there's a peak now in the correlation algorithm that might be wrong. How we do this in hardware? Well, you don't need a super fancy setup, so basically now the packet format is interesting again, like we have some preamble, SFD doesn't matter. Here is the security critical STS, physical header, data payload, all doesn't matter. And now with a dev kit, we can also send such a signal. We cannot send an arbitrary waveform, so that's a limitation, but the Corvo dev kit allows us to set a signal strength per field and stop after the STS. So we don't really override the preamble and SFD, we just say we have the STS that we want to overshadow with noise, and afterwards we stop. Like this is the attacker signal, and you can craft this with like 50 euros of hardware, like super, super cheap attack, super portable. And this is sufficient to confuse this correlation. Now we have two limitations. The first one is the size of the backsearch window, which happens on Apple devices to result in a distance shortening of up to 12 meters. But it's not always 12 meters. Like it's just somewhere in this window. And it's also not always successful, as it is like it's random stuff that we overshadow. But here you see the attack setup. So here we have an iPhone, we have an NXP dev kit on the other end, and they measure 8 meters, so they think it's 8 meters. And here's the dev kit for the 50 euros. We start the attack, and then the distance will be jumping around up to 0 meters. So it really works with this cheap setup. Now when you measure different chips and devices, it turns out that only the Apple U1 chip seems to be highly affected. So there's this maximum of 12 meters and a success rate of around 4%. But the actual attack also exists on the other chips, like a specification compliant that you have this backsearch window and do some correlation. The issue is the algorithms are not public, so we don't really know what is the allowance and stuff in the algorithm. And what happens is, like, if you do thousands of measurements over a day, even for the other chips from the other vendors, you would, from time to time, get an outlier where you shorten the distance, where it suddenly jumps to 0. But it's really not reliable. It's not in a success rate range where you would say, okay, now we can easily steal a car with this. But what is interesting about this attack as well, like it's not just specification compliant, but also if only one chip in the communication end is affected because of like having multiple parties involved, you can shorten the distance. So you saw in the setup we had an Apple device and an NXP device and a Corvo device attacking, and we were able to shorten the measured distance to this NXP device. So it really doesn't matter who does the mistake, and it also really depends, like maybe for a car key, if it would only take a single measurement and rely on this for opening the door. If I have a night in front of someone's house where the car is parked, this might already be sufficient to steal it. So what can you do about it? So the first thing is the attack success rate is really random. So we don't know this scrambled timestamp sequence, like we don't know it, we just overshadow it, and then we hope that the correlation algorithm does us a favor, which means the distance is now starting to jump around between different values. And something that Apple already did in very early releases is that depending on which framework you use and how and in which applications, they have one where they take actually 11 measurements, and if the mean of the last 11 measurements deviates more than 1 meter from the next measurement, then let's just say like this one was invalid, we remove it from the measurement series. And I don't know if, like for Apple, that's in a user space software. I'm not sure if maybe the other chips that we saw already do this in hardware. So if they would do this, like that might explain why the success rate is so much lower, but we just don't know their implementation. Another thing is this backsearch window. You could say we make it much smaller than 12 meters, but now the issue is it's like a trade-off between usability and like because you want to work it from inside your pocket, and the other thing with can you steal a car or not, like it's really a trade-off. Maybe like 5 or 6 meters would still be good for usability, but 5 or 6 meters might also, for the video that we just saw, still be enough to steal a car. So this is really difficult to decide this, and also the specification doesn't really tell you like what is a good trade-off here. And finally, when you overshadow the STS, what could happen is that some bits in it flip. Like this is very normal in a radio transmission, like when you add noise and decode the signal, you might have some bit flips, and usually that's just compensated. But what is really important is that you double check that the STS that you received is the same that you expect, and then allow for a certain number of bit flips only. And this is again nothing that is like that the specification requests for, so there's like no guarantee of so and so many bits should be correct. But maybe this is also something that the other vendors did right and Apple didn't, but we don't know what is the difference because we don't have the source code of all the implementations, but could be one thing how most of the attacks are prevented. And yeah, so basically it would be good if the firmware of those chips would implement all the three things here, and then hope that the success rate of this type of attack is so low that it's not feasible in practice. All right, and with this, Alex is now going to show you the latest and greatest attack, which we didn't discover, but the same research team as we worked with on the first attack, they just found it and published it last week, I think, so it's like really new research.
Yeah, and this attack is called Time for Change. And this attack will also explain why I was showing you all this single-sided two-way ranging, double-sided two-way ranging, all these methods that exist there, because this attack works against single-sided two-way ranging. I said initially that with single-sided ranging, you also have clock drifts, and this clock drifts is like one clock is really accurate and the other one is like less accurate, and that can delay or shorten the time the device waits until it sends the response. So the cool thing is the clock drift can be measured. So the device can remove that clock drift and measure still a very accurate distance. And Qorvo, for example, one manufacturer of these ultra-wideband chips, is saying, oh, single-sided two-way ranging is less power consuming and as secure as double-sided two-way ranging, so you can just use it. No smartphone manufacturer does it for good, as you will see now. So the clock drift is something that can be measured by looking at the signal. So when the iPhone does ranging with the HomePod, then the signal should maybe look like that. But then maybe the clock of the iPhone degraded a bit over the years and the frequency is different from what it is expected to be. And by just checking what's the difference between the expected frequency and the frequency that I received, you can easily measure a clock drift and correct the measured distance. So what the attacker now does, he just takes a look at the clock drift. And here, in this case, the clock drift is 0. That's perfect. So with a perfect clock drift, the attacker can only manipulate it by a certain degree. He takes that signal, puts it through his fancy SDR device that shifts the frequency a little bit so that the clock drift reaches -40, which is the maximum that is the standard allowing. And then the signal is just sent out again. So it's just a loop. Signal comes in, frequency is slightly changed, sent out again, and the distance is shortened by -12 meters. And in that case, I don't know, HomePod might start playing or something like that. So here again, they can shorten the distance by -12 meters, very similar to what we reached with our previous attack. And one difference is, though, that this attack has a 100% success rate. When they get the signal in their frequency shift machine, I'd say call it like that now, and start the attack, it just immediately goes down to 0 and it stays like that. Like you can go from 10 meters to 0 meters. You can be very accurate on how you change the clock drift, so you can even emulate a person coming closer so that it looks like someone would approach a door and then the lock would open. So it's very difficult to detect it just by looking at the measured distances, even though if they here now make a big jump, but you can also control it more granularly. Good thing though, affected devices, Android and Apple devices are not affected by that because they don't rely on single-sided ranging, they only do the double-sided ranging. If they do it for security or if they do it for for just the reason that then both devices have access to the distance and can display it on a phone, which makes total sense. We don't know that, but they use it. And with all the chips, you can configure them how you want. So if you buy a dev kit and integrate that into your factory system to do ultra-wideband ranging, you might use some single-sided ranging because it uses less energy, and then you are affected by this attack. Here they tested only with the Quavo chips, but I suspect that all the other chipsets that are out there are also vulnerable, since this attack just works on the standard. Here the countermeasures. Obvious one is don't use single-sided ranging. The other ones are, if you must use that, then you can maybe have a look at the signals that are coming in and detect changes in the clock drift. It's difficult to be sure that the clock drift is actually just coming rather recent by an attacker. It could also be that temperature changes affect the clock drift and things like that. You can also monitor if there are duplicate signals, because when you do the attack, there's still always the proper signal that comes through, but then the signal of the attacker comes at basically sent at the same time with a different clock drift, so that could be detectable, but then you might have to look into hardware. You cannot verify if the clock drift is actually by the device you're expecting it to be, so that's just a hardware thing that is measured, so it's not that you can put a signature on top of it or encrypt it or things like that to make sure that it's actually authenticated. And what would help, again, is reducing the tolerance that we have in the standard. And now Jiska will tell us some short conclusions that we learned in our research.
Yeah, but what's the conclusion? Well, you can design cryptography in a protocol really secure. You can think about key exchange whatsoever, but if your physical layer is broken and attackable, it works without any access to secrets, and this is just what you saw here. Like, no matter how secure all the upper layers are, we were able to attack it on the lower layer. Yeah, thank you for listening, and now we have some time for questions.
All right. So, are there any questions from the audience? None. Don't be shy, we have time. No worries.
Yeah. Questions to the audience. Who of you has a digital car key driven car?
Mostly BMW.
Yeah.
Oh, there's one.
Yeah. 3, I think. 3 so far.
Last year there was a Tesla talk. There were more people having a Tesla.
Yeah, maybe it's also just, you know, we just remember the faces and then steal their cars so they wouldn't raise their hands.
Ah, right.
Yeah.
That's why the hand was not so high. It was like this.
Yeah.
There's one question.
Yeah.
Question or digital car key?
How many BMW cars and Teslas do you now have in your parking garages?
We cannot answer this. No, actually it's pretty difficult, like even legally getting one, because it's like there's not so many cars with ultra-wideband key fobs out there yet. So that is also difficult for the research. Like, we're attacking a technology prior to its major rollout, but it's also good, like, because we now look into the security issues and it can be fixed before everyone has a digital car key.
Did you have the chance to try it out in a real-world scenario, like with a real Tesla or a real BMW, just for checking if it's feasible, you know?
It's a long discussion with BMW that has been happening, and we didn't come to the conclusion that we are allowed to try it on a car so far.
That's pretty sad.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
I have a question for the audience. Anyone who used any technology with ultra-wideband yet, where they actually know it? Yes? Yeah, there are some. Good, good.
Maybe I have another question. So for the one attack with the double-sided, you basically exploited the fact that the antenna sometimes used a non-directional travel path. So is this a problem of the antenna being just sensitive in basically one direction and could be solved by using multiple antennas stick to device on distinct positions so that basically always the shortest path has one antenna that also has then the strongest signal in this direction?
Not really, like, because let's say I have the key fob like here in a pocket and there's the car, it always travels through me. And actually the iPhone has 3 antennas, which they do for the angular ranging. And for all the 3 antennas, it's measuring the optimal path, and then it actually selects from the 3 antennas the one with the least noise. So it's already doing a lot about getting the best antenna signal.
Okay, so the problem is basically obstacles in the way, and that's why it goes. Okay.
Yes.
But also one big obstacle that's in the way is the phone itself, because the phone now they have like so much technology inside that the antennas basically only work really good in one direction, and they don't place the antennas like around the phone and like in front of the display. That wouldn't work, and on the sides because on the sides also doesn't work because it's mostly metal, so they are all on the one side, and then as soon as your phone is wrongly placed or differently placed as expected, it doesn't work as good anymore.
All right, thank you. There's one more question.
I'm not entirely sure that Dennis's question wasn't mostly the same thing I'm going to ask, because I didn't quite understand. Are the car key fobs doing or the cars themselves doing angular measurements, or do they only consider like distance?
I mean, we don't have a car measurement yet, so I think only distance, but they have multiple antennas, or maybe even multiple chips, I don't know how exactly, but they have multiple in the car. I think there's like 5 or so, because the issue with a car is, again, like it's metal, it blocks the signal, and you need to be able to approach from different directions to a car so that it opens.
Okay. So I think a car is, as you said, 5, and they're like on both doors, on top of the car and the backside and so on, so that the car has like different, it's like getting an angle because it gets the signal from one side, but it's not, I think it's not using the angle to determine the distance or make some enhancements.
Maybe it's plausibility checks or something could be happening, but yeah. Okay.
There's one question in the back. Or maybe you first.
Can you do anything else than just sending pulses with UWB? So can you? So is there an official way of sending more data, something more interesting, or did you already explore using it as a covert channel, for example?
You can send data. So the pulses also, they are modulated in a way that you can then transform them into bits in the end, and then you have an actual data channel. But Apple, for example, their goal, and there's this Fine Ranging Alliance, their goal is basically to use ultra-wideband only to do the pulses that are needed for the distance measurement, and they're moving even more to sending the necessary data that has to be shared, like the reply time and the time when the other device has received your message. They're doing that, for example, on the AirTag over Bluetooth. So and also it could be that the car implementation also uses Bluetooth for that, because also you always have a Bluetooth connection to the car, because you have the button to say open the car and close that car, and that's all over Bluetooth.
But I think it's like really a good decision for the security. Like you only use it for ranging, no data transfer. There isn't so much logic, like the STS is transmitted and stuff, but I think finding a buffer overflow in this very simple protocol will be difficult, like really the difference to all the other wireless protocols. And also interesting is like something we didn't talk about, but the U1 chip has a different AP and DSP. And the DSP part, which is the one that receives the raw signal and processes it first, it's actually 64-bit ARMS and has ASLR, so it would be really difficult to exploit over the air. I think we wouldn't see the standard wireless attacks on this.
Then there was a question in the back.
Yes, thanks. Is there a minimal distance for this technology? For example, what happens if the user loses his phone or forgets his phone in the car itself?
then the car would stay open, I think.
We hope. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah.
We don't know, but I guess because like it also, there's one ultra-wideband chip in the car that can detect if your phone is actually in the car, not outside, so that it can measure like multiple ranging at the same time and then see that the one in the car is the closest and things like that.
Yeah, probably it would be a good idea to implement a minimal distance so that the user who forgets his phone in the car is not attacked by an attacker who walks by and opens the car.
Yeah.
I don't know.
All right. Any more
Yeah.
questions?
I don't think so.
Then thank you again for all the interesting questions.
Yeah, thank you.